The rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop exploding into silver fragments before sliding down the glass. Marcus Hale's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, watching the red and blue lights slice through the darkness behind him. The police cruiser's siren had gone silent, but those lights, God, those lights, painted everything in alternating shades of danger and dread. His heart thundered in his chest, not from guilt, but from a fear that every black man in America carries like a second skin. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m., late enough that the roads were empty, late enough that there would be no witnesses. "Stay calm," Marcus whispered to himself, his breath fogging in the cold air. His FBI badge pressed against his ribs from inside his jacket pocket, a secret weight that could either save him or make things infinitely worse. 3 years undercover investigating weapons trafficking through rural Georgia, and it might all end here in a gas station parking lot because of the color of his skin. The cruiser door slammed with military precision. Through his side mirror, Marcus watched the officer approach, a mountain of a man whose hand already rested on his holster. The rain created a halo effect around the cop's flashlight beam, turning it into a spotlight that would illuminate whatever tragedy was about to unfold. Marcus had been here before. Different towns, different badges, same script. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air itself seemed to crackle with the promise of violence. The officer's boots splashed through puddles, each step a countdown to confrontation. Marcus could see it in the man's posture, the coiled tension of someone looking for a fight, the swagger of unchecked authority. The flashlight beam hit Marcus's face like a slap, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. In that blinding white light, Marcus wasn't Special Agent Hale anymore. He was just another black man in a hoodie, guilty of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The question wasn't whether this would go bad, it was how bad it would get before it was over. The Sunoco station on Highway 41 had seen better days. Paint peeled from its walls like dead skin, and half the letters in its sign had burned out years ago. It sat on the edge of Fairview, Georgia, a town of 8,000 souls where everybody knew everybody, and outsiders were noticed like blood and water. The town had been founded in 1842, built on cotton and sustained by tradition. Even now, in 2024, it clung to its past like a drowning man to driftwood. Marcus had chosen this place specifically because it was forgettable, anonymous, a perfect spot for someone who needed to disappear into the background while tracking illegal weapons moving through the rural South. The investigation, codenamed Operation Crossroads, had begun 3 years ago when the ATF intercepted a shipment of military-grade weapons bound for militia groups. The trail had led here to Fairview, where someone was using the town's isolation and good old boy network to move enough firepower to arm a small army. For 3 years, Special Agent Marcus Hale had been living a lie. To his neighbors in the rundown apartment complex on Maple Street, he was Marcus Johnson, a warehouse worker who kept to himself and drove a beat-up Honda Civic that had seen 200,000 miles. The car was a masterpiece of calculated neglect. Rust in all the right places, a dent in the rear bumper. One headlight slightly dimmer than the other. It was the kind of car that cops usually ignored, that blended into the background of working-class America. He wore the same rotation of hoodies and work boots, ate at the same diner every Tuesday, always the meatloaf special, always alone at the counter, and never drew attention to himself. He'd learned to hunch his shoulders slightly to avoid eye contact, to move through the world like someone who'd been beaten down by life. It was a far cry from his real life, the life where he'd graduated magna cum laude from Howard University, where he'd finished top of his class at Quantico, where he'd solved cases that made headlines, where he wore tailored suits and commanded respect in federal buildings. But undercover work demanded sacrifice. It demanded becoming invisible, becoming someone else entirely. And Marcus had gotten good at it, maybe too good. Sometimes he'd catch himself in the mirror and barely recognize the man staring back. The clean-shaven federal agent with the 1,000-watt smile had been replaced by someone with tired eyes and a week's worth of stubble, someone who'd learned to shrink himself to avoid notice. The apartment on Maple Street was a far cry from his real home in Atlanta, where his fiancée, Dr. Keisha Williams, waited for his monthly check-ins. She was a pediatric surgeon at Emory, brilliant and beautiful, and she hated every second of this assignment. 3 years, Marcus, she'd said during their last conversation. 3 years of your life given to people who would cross the street if they saw you coming. He hadn't been able to argue with her logic, but the job was the job. Someone had to stop the weapons from reaching the wrong hands, and he was uniquely qualified to be that someone. Officer Dwayne Mercer had been patrolling these roads for 15 years. At 38, he was what the old-timers called good police. Tough on crime, tougher on outsiders, and toughest on anyone who didn't look like they belonged. His father, Sheriff Roy Mercer, had ruled the neighboring county for 3 decades with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of Southern charm. Roy had taught his son that there were 2 kinds of people in the world, us and them always needed watching. Dwayne had absorbed these lessons like scripture. He joined the force straight out of high school, skipping college because the streets were all the education a real cop needed. He'd risen through the ranks not through merit, but through a combination of family connections and a willingness to do the dirty work that others shied away from. His arrest record was impressive on paper, until you looked closer and saw how many cases were thrown out, how many complaints were buried, how many settlements the city had quietly paid to make problems go away. To his fellow officers, Mercer was a hero. He had the most arrests in the department, the most commendations on his wall, the most stories of perps he'd taken down. He held court at Dixie's bar every Friday night, regaling younger officers with tales of the good old days when cops could be cops and people knew their place. What those stories never mentioned were the teenagers roughed up for walking in the wrong neighborhood, the traffic stops that turned violent for no reason, the way certain drivers knew to take alternate routes to avoid his patrol zone. Mercer lived alone in a house his father had left him, a 2-story colonial on the white side of town. The walls were covered with hunting trophies, deer heads with glassy eyes, a black bear rug that his grandfather had shot, photographs of 3 generations of Mercer men in uniform. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman named Charlene, who'd eventually grown tired of his moods and his drinking and his inability to see the world as anything other than us versus them. She'd left him 5 years ago, taking nothing but her clothes and her dignity, leaving him with empty rooms and the bitter certainty that the world was going to hell because people had gotten too soft. He filled the emptiness with work, with 12-hour shifts that stretched into 16, with a vigilance that bordered on paranoia. He knew every car that belonged in Fairview, every face that had a right to be there, and he knew with a certainty that went bone deep that it was his job to keep the outsiders out, to maintain the order that his father and grandfather had built. That night, Mercer had been cruising his usual route, a loop that took him from the wealthy neighborhoods near the country club down through Main Street and out to the edges of town where the wrong element might try to creep in. He'd already made 2 stops. A Hispanic family whose taillight was out, he'd let them go with a warning and a clear message that they should keep driving through Fairview. And a group of black teenagers who'd been walking home from basketball practice. He'd made them empty their pockets and check their IDs, just to be safe. He was thinking about calling it a night, maybe stopping by Dixie's for a beer, when he spotted the Honda pulling into the Sunoco. Something about it triggered his instincts, or what he called instincts, but were really just prejudices dressed up in a uniform. A black man in a hoodie, driving alone at night, pulling into a gas station on the edge of town. In Mercer's mind, the equation was simple. Black plus hoodie plus night equaled probable cause. He'd followed at a distance first, running the plates through his computer. They came back clean, registered to Marcus Johnson, no warrants, no record. But that didn't mean anything. The smart ones always kept their noses clean, always had their paperwork in order. His father had taught him that. The rain had started as a drizzle around 11:30, the kind of gentle mist that made the road slick and the air heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and pine. Marcus had been driving back from a meeting with an informant in Atlanta, his mind still processing the information he'd gathered. The shipment was bigger than they'd thought. Not just rifles and handguns, but military-grade explosives, the kind that could turn a federal building into rubble. The informant, a low-level dealer named Trey who'd gotten in over his head, had been sweating bullets as he'd laid out the details in a diner booth. "They're planning something big," Trey had whispered, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. "I heard them talking about making a statement, about showing the government that real Americans won't be pushed around anymore." Marcus had recorded everything, another piece of evidence in a case that was finally coming together after 3 years of patient work. He'd been so focused on the implications, the need to move fast, to coordinate with ATF, to prevent what could be a domestic terrorist attack, that he'd almost passed the Sunoco without noticing his gaslight. As he'd pulled in, he'd noticed the security camera mounted on the corner of the building, its red light blinking steadily. Good, he'd thought. If anything happens, at least there will be footage. It was the kind of thought that came automatically now, the constant calculation of a black man in America. Where are the cameras? Where are the witnesses? Where are the exits? He'd parked at Pump 3, the one farthest from the building but still in view of the camera. Another calculation, visible enough to be seen, far enough to have room to maneuver if needed. He'd been reaching for his wallet when the lights exploded behind him. "License and registration." Now, Mercer's voice cut through the rain like a rusty blade. He stood at Marcus's window, water dripping from the brim of his campaign hat, his hand resting on his Glock 19 with practiced ease. The weapon was already unsnapped, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Marcus kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his movements deliberate and slow. 20 years of training, first from his father, then from the FBI, had taught him that sudden movements could be fatal. His father, a Baptist minister in Birmingham, had given him the talk when he was 12 years old. Not about sex or drugs, but about how to survive an encounter with the police. Yes, sir. No, sir. Hands where they can see them. No sudden movements. Come home alive. The words echoed in his mind now, a mantra of survival. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I've been stopped?" The question seemed to irritate Mercer. His jaw tightened, and he leaned closer, bringing with him the smell of coffee and cigarettes and something else, the sour scent of a man looking for trouble. "I'll ask the questions here. License and registration." "Of course, officer." "My wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly." Marcus narrated each movement, a survival technique as automatic as breathing. He retrieved his wallet, the one with his Marcus Johnson ID, not his FBI credentials, and handed it over along with the registration from the glove compartment. Mercer snatched the documents, his flashlight beam dancing between the ID and Marcus's face. The light lingered on Marcus's features, cataloging them: dark skin, close-cropped hair, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. Mercer's eyes narrowed as he studied the address. "Marcus Johnson, Maple Street. That's the Riverside Apartments, isn't it?" "Yes, sir, ma." "Lot of trouble comes out of that complex." Marcus bit back the response that wanted to come. That trouble was Mercer's code for black and brown people. Instead, he kept his voice neutral. "I wouldn't know about that, officer. I keep to myself. What are you doing out here this time of night?" "Just getting gas, officer. Heading home from Atlanta." Atlanta. Mercer said it like it was a dirty word, like the very mention of the city was an admission of guilt. To men like Mercer, Atlanta represented everything wrong with the New South. Too diverse, too liberal, too willing to forget the old ways. "What's in Atlanta?" Marcus felt the familiar burn of indignation rising in his chest, but kept his voice level. "Visiting a friend." "A friend." Mercer's tone dripped skepticism. "What kind of friend?" "A college friend, officer. We had dinner." College. Another word that seemed to offend Mercer. His flashlight beam swept the interior of the car, looking for anything: drugs, weapons, open containers, air fresheners that could mask the smell of marijuana, anything that could justify what he was doing. "Where'd you go to college?" It was a trap, and Marcus knew it. Say a prestigious school, and he'd be uppity. Say a community college, and he'd be lying. Mercer would check. Say nothing, and he'd be resisting. "Georgia State," Marcus lied smoothly. It was part of his cover story, complete with fake transcripts in case anyone checked. You been drinking tonight, Marcus? No, sir. Smoking anything you shouldn't be? No, sir. You seem nervous. I'm not nervous, officer. I'm cautious. There's a difference. Mercer's face darkened. He wasn't used to suspects who spoke in complete sentences, who didn't stammer or sweat or give him the fear he fed on. He circled the car slowly, his flashlight probing through the windows like a searchlight looking for enemy planes. The rain was picking up now, turning from drizzle to steady downpour, but Mercer seemed in no hurry. He was enjoying the power, the control, the way Marcus had to sit there and take it. Step out of the vehicle, Mercer commanded when he returned to the driver's side. Marcus's jaw tightened. There was no legal reason for him to exit the car. No traffic violation, no visible evidence of wrongdoing, nothing but the color of his skin and Mercer's assumptions. But he also knew that asserting his rights could escalate things quickly. He'd seen the videos, read the reports, attended the funerals of men who dared to ask why. Officer, am I being detained? Can you tell what violation I've committed? Mercer's face flushed red, visible even in the alternating police lights. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone who looked like Marcus. In his world, authority was absolute, obedience was expected, and questions were a form of resistance. I said step out of the vehicle. Don't make me ask again. The threat hung in the air between them, as heavy as the rain clouds overhead. Marcus could feel the situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one wrong movement, and this could spiral into something that would make headlines if anyone bothered to report it at all. Another black man shot during a routine traffic stop. Another officer who feared for his life. Another family left to mourn while the system protected its own. Slowly, carefully, Marcus opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The cold water immediately soaked through his hoodie, but he kept his hands visible, his movements calm. He'd been trained to take down armed suspects, to handle high-pressure situations that would break most people. He could disarm Mercer in 3 moves, could have him on the ground before the man knew what hit him. But all that training felt useless now, faced with a different kind of danger, the kind that came with a badge and a bias. Turn around, hands on the vehicle, Mercer ordered. Officer, I haven't committed any crime. I said turn around. Mercer's hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it but making the threat clear. His fingers drummed against the holster, a nervous tick that spoke of adrenaline and anticipation. Marcus turned, placing his palms flat on the wet roof of his car. The position was deliberately humiliating, designed to establish dominance. He'd used it himself during arrests, but being on the receiving end gave him a new perspective on how dehumanizing it felt. The rain ran down his neck, cold fingers tracing his spine. He could see his reflection in the car window, distorted by water and darkness. A man made small, made vulnerable, made less than. Mercer's hands moved over him in a rough pat-down, searching for weapons that didn't exist, for drugs that weren't there, for any excuse to justify what he was doing. The search was invasive, aggressive, designed to provoke a reaction. Mercer's hands lingered, pressed harder than necessary, violated the professional boundaries that separated a lawful search from an assault. You carrying anything I should know about? Mercer's breath was hot on Marcus's neck, coffee and cigarettes and barely contained aggression. No, officer, I'm unarmed. We'll see about that. Mercer's hands moved to Marcus's pockets, pulling out his phone, a pack of gum, $37 in cash. He examined each item like evidence of a crime yet to be discovered. Where'd you get this money? From my wallet, officer. It's mine. Drug dealers carry cash. So do people who work for a living. It was the wrong thing to say. Mercer spun him around, slamming him against the car hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. The metal was cold against his back, the rain running into his eyes, blurring his vision. You got a smart mouth, boy. Boy, the word hung in the air like a poison, decades of hatred condensed into 3 letters. Marcus felt something snap inside him. Not his control, but his willingness to play this game any longer. He'd been called that word before by suspects who thought it would hurt him, by citizens who didn't think he belonged in their neighborhoods, by other cops who forgot he was one of them the moment he took off his badge. "I'm 34 years old, officer. I'm a man, not a boy. And I've done nothing wrong except drive while black in your town." Mercer's face flushed red, visible even in the alternating police lights. His hand moved to his cuffs. "That's it. You're under arrest for obstruction." "On what grounds?" Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. "What lawful order have I obstructed? What crime have you articulated? Do you have reasonable suspicion? Probable cause? Or is it just that I'm black and you're bored?" The questions hit Mercer like physical blows. He wasn't used to suspects who knew the law, who could articulate their rights, who refused to be intimidated. In 15 years on the force, he'd perfected a system. Intimidate, escalate, arrest, let the lawyers sort it out later. Most people, especially black men in Fairview, knew better than to challenge that system. They took their lumps, paid their fines, and learned to drive around his patrol zone. But this man, this Marcus Johnson, wasn't following the script. He wasn't angry enough to give Mercer an excuse for violence, wasn't scared enough to incriminate himself, wasn't ignorant enough to make a mistake. It was like trying to grip water. The harder Mercer squeezed, the more control slipped through his fingers. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his radio. "Unit 23 requesting backup at the Sunoco on Highway 41. Got a 1054 here. 10-54, possible intoxicated driver." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Mercer was manufacturing probable cause in real time, creating a narrative that would justify whatever came next. It was a trick as old as policing itself. If the facts don't fit the arrest, change the facts. "I haven't been drinking, officer, and you know it," Marcus said quietly. "No slurred speech, no smell of alcohol, no failed field sobriety test because you haven't even asked me to perform one. That's going to be hard to explain to a judge." "Judges around here trust my judgment," Mercer snarled. "And my judgment says you're drunk, high, or both. Your judgment says I'm black. Everything else is just paperwork." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, Mercer's mask slipped and Marcus saw the truth underneath. Not a lawman concerned with public safety, but a small man drunk on power, terrified of a world where people who looked like Marcus didn't automatically defer to people who looked like him. While they waited for backup, the two men stood in the rain, locked in a silent battle of wills. Marcus kept his hands visible, but refused to return to the degrading position against the car. Mercer kept his hand near his weapon but seemed uncertain how to proceed with a suspect who wouldn't follow the usual script. The rain intensified, turning the parking lot into a river of reflected lights. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the sky itself was commenting on the injustice playing out below. Marcus's hoodie was soaked through, water running down his face like tears he refused to shed. He thought of Keisha, probably asleep in their bed in Atlanta, unaware that the man she loved was standing in a gas station parking lot, one wrong move away from becoming another statistic. He thought of his mother, Sarah Hale, who'd marched with Dr. King and Selma, who'd been hit with fire hoses in Birmingham, who'd believed that her children would inherit a better world. She died 2 years ago, still believing, still hoping. Marcus was glad she wasn't here to see this, to see how little had really changed. "You know what your problem is?" Mercer finally said, his voice low and mean. "You people always think you're above the law, always got an attitude, always resisting." "You people," Marcus repeated softly. "And what people would that be, officer?" Mercer's face twisted. He knew he'd crossed a line, said the quiet part out loud, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "You know exactly what I mean. Coming into our town, thinking you own the place, no respect for authority." "I respect authority that respects me," Marcus said. "I respect law enforcement that enforces the law equally. What I don't respect is a badge being used as a weapon against citizens whose only crime is existing." "You think you're smart, don't you? Think that college education makes you better than me?" "I think education makes me different from you, officer. Whether that's better or worse depends on how we each choose to use what we've learned." It was a challenge, direct and unmistakable. Mercer's hand moved to his cuffs again, then stopped. Something in Marcus's eyes, A complete lack of fear, maybe, or a confidence that went deeper than bravado made him hesitate. He'd broken men before, made them beg, made them cry, made them confess to crimes they hadn't committed just to make it stop. But this man stood in the rain like he was carved from stone, unmovable and unafraid. The sound of approaching sirens broke the standoff. Two more cruisers pulled into the lot, their lights adding to the chaos of red and blue. Officers Patricia Chen and James Williams emerged, both younger than Mercer, both looking confused about why they'd been called to a routine traffic stop. Chen was 32, a second-generation Chinese-American who joined the force despite her parents' wishes that she become a doctor or lawyer. She'd faced her own share of discrimination, been told she was a diversity hire, been passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified white men. She'd learned to navigate the department's politics with a combination of competence and careful silence, picking her battles, waiting for her moment. Williams was 28, born and raised in Fairview's black neighborhood, what the white folks called the other side of the tracks, and what the residents called home. He joined the force with idealistic dreams of changing things from the inside, of being the kind of cop his community could trust. 3 years in, those dreams had been tempered by reality, but not extinguished. He still believed in the badge, even when his fellow officers made it hard. "What have we got, Mercer?" Chen asked, her hand resting casually on her duty belt. She took in the scene, Marcus standing calmly in the rain, Mercer's aggressive posture, the absence of any visible crime, and felt her stomach tighten. "Suspected DUI," Mercer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Subject's been non-compliant." Williams looked at Marcus, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, of shared understanding. He saw himself in this man, saw his brother, his cousins, his friends who'd all had their own encounters with Officer Mercer. He saw the careful way Marcus held himself, the practiced calm that every black man in America learned as a survival skill. "He seemed intoxicated to you?" Williams asked carefully. "He's got an attitude," Mercer snapped. "That's not illegal," Chen observed. She was known in the department for being by the book, which made her unpopular with officers like Mercer who preferred the old ways. "Has he taken a field sobriety test?" "He's been resistant." "I've been compliant with every lawful order," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying clearly through the rain. "I've provided my license and registration, submitted to an illegal search, and been threatened with arrest for exercising my constitutional rights. What I haven't done is consent to being harassed because Officer Mercer doesn't like the color of my skin." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Chen and Williams exchanged glances. They could see what this was, had seen it before, would see it again. The question was whether they'd back their fellow officer or do what was right. "Mercer," Williams said slowly, Maybe you should remember whose side you're on," Mercer cut him off, his eyes flashing dangerously. "Blue looks after blue. Always has, always will." It was a threat and a reminder. The thin blue line wasn't just about loyalty, it was about survival in a department where crossing the wrong person could end your career. Williams had seen it happen to officers who reported misconduct, who testified against their partners, who chose justice over solidarity. They found themselves working the worst shifts, passed over for promotions, isolated and eventually driven out. But standing there in the rain, watching Marcus maintain his dignity in the face of blatant harassment, Williams felt something shift inside him. He thought of his nephew, just turned 16, who'd soon be driving these same streets. He thought of the promise he'd made to his community when he put on the badge. He thought of the kind of cop he wanted to be versus the kind of cop the department wanted him to be. "I'm not on anyone's side," Williams said quietly. "I'm on the law's side. And from where I'm standing, this man hasn't broken any laws." Mercer's face contorted with rage. "You forgetting where you come from, Williams? Forgetting who pays your salary?" "The citizens pay my salary," Williams replied, "including this citizen." Chen stepped forward, positioning herself between Mercer and Marcus. "Let's all take a breath here. Sir," she addressed Marcus, "have you been drinking tonight?" "No, ma'am. I had dinner with a friend in Atlanta and was driving home when Officer Mercer pulled me over." I haven't been given a reason for the stop, haven't been told what law I've broken. I've been searched without consent, threatened with arrest without cause, and called boy by an officer who seems to have a problem with my existence. Chen's jaw tightened at the word boy. She'd heard Mercer use it before, always with black suspects, always with that particular tone that made it clear it wasn't about age. She'd never said anything, had told herself it wasn't her battle to fight, but standing here, watching this play out, she realized that silence was complicity. Officer Mercer, she said formally, what was your probable cause for the initial stop? He was driving suspiciously. How so? He was driving slowly, looking around. I was looking for a gas station, Marcus interjected. My fuel light was on. In this weather, driving slowly would be prudent, Chen observed. That's not suspicious behavior. Mercer's hand clenched and unclenched at his side. He could feel control of the situation slipping away, could feel Chen and Williams aligning against him. In all his years on the force, he'd never had fellow officers question him like this, especially not in front of a suspect. You two need to remember how things work around here, he said, his voice low and threatening. This isn't Atlanta. This isn't some liberal city where criminals get treated better than cops. This is Fairview, and in Fairview, we do things a certain way. The wrong way, Marcus said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood straighter now, the rain still falling, but somehow seeming less oppressive. For 3 years, I've watched how things work in Fairview, Marcus continued. I've seen who gets stopped, who gets searched, who gets arrested. I've seen justice dispensed based on zip code and skin color. I've seen good people afraid to drive through their own town after dark. And I've seen officers like you, Officer Mercer, who've forgotten that the badge is supposed to protect and serve everyone, not just the people who look like you. You don't know anything about me, Mercer snarled. I know you're scared, Marcus said simply. Scared of losing power, scared of a changing world, scared of people who don't automatically defer to your authority. That fear makes you dangerous. It makes you see threats where there are none, enemies where there are only citizens. Marcus reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately. Don't move. Mercer's weapon cleared its holster, pointing directly at Marcus's chest. Chen and Williams tensed, hands moving to their own weapons, but not drawing them. I'm reaching for my wallet, Marcus said calmly, though his heart was racing. Inside jacket pocket. I'm going to show you something that will change the nature of this encounter. I said don't move. Mercer's finger moved to the trigger guard. The Glock 19 trembled slightly in his grip, betraying his nervousness. Mercer, ease up, Chen said sharply. Let him show you. He's reaching for a weapon. He's reaching for his wallet, Williams said. Stand down, Mercer. Time seemed to slow. The rain fell in sheets now, creating a curtain of water around them. Marcus could see his life flashing before his eyes. Not the past, but the future that might be cut short by a nervous trigger finger and a racist cop. He thought of all the names that had become hashtags, all the families left to grieve, all the justice denied. But he also thought of his duty, not just as an FBI agent, but as a human being who'd been given the power to make a difference. Sometimes that difference came from solving cases. Sometimes it came from moments like this, when the system's failures were laid bare and someone had to bear witness. With movements so slow they were almost painful, Marcus extracted his FBI credentials and held them up where all 3 officers could see them. The gold badge caught the light from the cruisers, impossible to mistake. Special Agent Marcus Hale, FBI, badge number 4827. I'm on an undercover assignment, and Officer Mercer has just compromised 3 years of federal investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. Mercer's weapon wavered, then lowered slightly. Chen's mouth fell open. Williams let out a low whistle. Your FBI? Mercer's voice cracked like a teenager's. For the last 12 years, Marcus confirmed, and everything that's happened here tonight, every word, every action has been recorded. He tapped his chest where a small recording device was hidden beneath his hoodie. This is what we call a teachable moment, Officer Mercer. Mercer's weapon dropped to his side as the full weight of what had happened crashed down on him. He'd racially profiled a federal agent, drawn his weapon on a federal agent, threatened to arrest a federal agent for knowing his rights. His career, his pension, his entire life flashed before his eyes. I, I didn't, Mercer stammered. No, you didn't, Marcus agreed. You didn't see a federal agent. You didn't see a law-abiding citizen. You didn't see a human being worthy of respect. You saw a black man in a hoodie and made assumptions that could have cost me my life. Chen holstered her weapon, her mind racing. This was going to be a nightmare. Internal investigations, federal oversight, media attention. But part of her, the part that had joined the force to make a difference, felt a grim satisfaction. Maybe this would finally force the changes that should have happened years ago. William stood frozen, processing what he'd just witnessed. An FBI agent, undercover in their town. He wondered what case had brought federal attention to Fairview, wondered how many other secrets were hiding beneath the surface of their quiet town. 3 years, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. 3 years I've been in this town, watching how the law gets enforced. 3 years of seeing people who look like me treated as automatic suspects. 3 years of biting my tongue while officers like you abuse their power. Well, tonight it ends. Agent Hale, Chen stepped forward, her voice professional. I apologize for what's happened here. This isn't representative of... Isn't it? Marcus interrupted. How many times has Officer Mercer done this before? How many complaints have been filed and ignored? How many people have been harassed, humiliated, hurt because nobody wanted to rock the boat? Chen had no answer. They all knew the truth. Mercer's behavior was an open secret, tolerated because he got results, because he was connected, because confronting him meant confronting the entire culture of the department. I want your supervisor here. Now, Marcus said, and I want internal affairs. This isn't